It's a controls problem. My name is Charles. I am your co-host. I'm here with Matthew Vanberg as well. Matthew, say hello.
Hello.
And we're here with a special guest today. As some of you know, we mentioned a little bit about AI, but we're really going to do a deep dive into it today. And so I have here as a very special guest, a dear friend of mine. His name is Cameron Keene, and he works with DLB Associates. So Cameron, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, I'm Cameron. I got 6 years of control background experience and have moved away from that and now do pure full stack software development slash engineering. So it's been a ride.
Good. So let's go ahead and kick off this podcast here as we talked about AI and what it what we feel that it could do or what it's currently doing in the building automation industry and even a little bit more and maybe even dabble in the future of what we think AI could really go. So. Matthew, how much AI experience do you have?
I'm a daily user, but my purpose for AI currently is not what an engineer or a developer would probably use it for, but I use it as a marketing tool. I do actually use it as a development tool, like for HTML and editing stuff like that for back-end website stuff. But to a very minimal extent, because it's pretty bright at stuff like that. I find it's very well versed in back end web application stuff. Beyond that, I'm using it to, help me come up with ideas for LinkedIn posts, get me started on a sales sheet. Anything like that is where my daily use of it, and it's growing every day too.
So Cameron, how about you? What do you do with AI specifically? Well, I mean, maybe you can't get in specifics, but what do you do with AI?
Yeah, I can give some examples. So well, first, this whole chat GPT stuff is pretty new, right, to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Or large language models to be more specific. But I've actually had a blast working with them so far and learning how they operate, being able to use them and integrate them into software itself to help automate some processes. So I use it absolutely every day to either help me code, whether that's C# coding, even some Java for Niagara stuff, writing SQL scripts, you name it. It's great at stuff like that with these chat GPT models or Claude, whichever one you prefer to use. Even the Olama models are absolutely excellent if you want to run them on your own hardware. And then more of some crazy stuff that I've hooked up is as a project to also do for work, but also some kind of side projects that I found very interesting. Was side project would be something like everybody knows of Linux. I called it the Linux Buddy. It's a little command line tool. So when you hop into Linux and you're trying to run some commands to figure out, and there's millions of them, to really utilize all that ability, you can just type in LB, abbreviated for Linux Buddy, and then type what you want to have GPT generate your command prompt command for you, and then hit enter, and it'll paste it back in and pretty much gets you exactly what you want. So I found that very helpful as like a little side project. And
Sounds pretty
then,
helpful.
yeah, yeah. So that was a fun one to learn about, really building a console application and getting all that to work. And that would be, you don't have to use ChatGPT for that. You can use something like Olama running locally. So if you got a graphics card, it'll do all the processing there. And it was extremely fast. Um, some actual like production products that we've made. We've made one for expense automation. So basically, people can just email in their expense receipts or submit them through a web application. We'll do some OCR, which I guess you could argue is AI, to get the text out, and then just run that right through ChatGPT or any of the large language models, and it will basically read that email or that submission of a receipt and pull out all the text and fill out the entries in a database for you. Because everybody hates doing expense reports, right?
No,
Yeah.
I don't like doing it. It
Yeah.
Well,
sounds like you're a lot more experienced than I am.
well,
Yeah, it's like my main job focus right
That's
now.
awesome.
Yeah, so it's been a blast. Um, yeah, and just kind of building off from there, right? Like I feel like it's so new that we haven't really realized all the little gaps that we can plug in software. Um, Controls, I feel like it's really gonna revolutionize the way people work, especially if they get more familiar with it. I mean, it already has, but there's some, businesses or trades that it hasn't really worked its way down to yet over the last like 2 to 3 years. But it'll definitely get there. So yeah, that's my
well,
experience.
well, I think from the, I think one thing that I think is a very, I see a lot of, I do see a lot of lashback, you know, or naysayers for like using ChatGPT, especially as a programmer. A lot of people feel that, or some of the community feel that, that it's cheating, or it makes you less intelligent to use ChatGPT or other large language learning or large language models. But I don't think of it that way. I think it makes you highly intelligent. Like if you think of it from like like a carpenter, right? So carpenter's used to building things with his hands, but there are more advanced tools to allow that carpenter to be more efficient. That doesn't
Right.
make him.
Like,
Yeah, go ahead.
are you gonna punch a nail?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And it doesn't make you any less of a carpenter. You still need the fundamentals and skills to do that, but now you're just making yourself more efficient. Like when you mentioned Chat GPT for like programming, one thing that, a lot of people are trying to do is they're trying to feed API to Chat GPT, such as like Baja, for Niagara,
Yep.
excuse me. And in certain instances it can do pretty well, but you still need the fundamentals to understand that that it may have gotten you, let's say, 80% of the way, and then you need just to finish that last 20. Or maybe you can help it learn and adapt, like, hey, by the way, for example, I was trying a little bit, just doing from B component, in Niagara, and so like it was saying, oh yeah, we use Git component. I'm like, well, Git is the actual method to use. It's like, oh yeah, you're right, blah blah blah. So then it actually went and changed it from like Git component to Git, or it would say change property, and like, well, actually, change is the method that you need to use for your callback. And so like it doesn't, so it doesn't get you 100% there, but it gets you it gets you there faster than you would instead of just typing it out on your own. As a matter of fact, I've even gotten it to write out for me the Niagara properties, like when developing a module. So then that way I just need to run Slotomatic instead, because I feel like, Cameron, and you know this, that I feel like when you're developing Niagara modules, you probably spend more time typing out the properties rather than the actual code itself.
Absolutely, yeah. It's there to replace the very mundane kind of deal, of like, I don't want to. If I can tell it, hey, I need these properties. Here's the names for them, and it adds in all the little, uh, the little, I guess, glitter around it to make it
Yep.
so it'll compile. I mean, you still have to, like you said, you still have to understand the fundamentals, and you have to understand, because you gotta relay that to it of like what you want, right? You're
Hmm.
you're not you're not gonna be able to ask it, hey, I need a module that does this and be very vague, and it just write the whole thing. That's, I mean, even probably, I mean, I might be wrong, but 10 years from now, like, it's more than likely not going to do that. You're going to have to know what you're asking for and guide it through the process, because, well, that's the whole point of like software engineering, right? Like, you need to know what the problem you're solving is.
Yep, I think that's I think that's really the best way to go about it. Some of the things with AI, a lot of it right now is unregulated, right? So maybe we have to come up with ways to regulate AI. But I think a lot of people are getting things like from like iRobot in the movies of the past. But AI has really, I think AI can help, it can help, assist us in our, as you said, the mundane things that we need to do. And if they can do that while we're working on something else at the same time, I think that's absolutely, it's absolutely great. It's easy to multitask. And with the with using it as really as an assistant, I don't think it replaces those kinds of things. And like you said, like even 10 years from now, you don't think it is. Like if you just as a or just as an aside, if you think of it like when people talked about backnet, right, and integration. I remember in like 2007, everyone was like, yeah, in 10 years, controls products are just going to go away, and it's going to be two wires or Ethernet cable to anything, and there's no need for controls because everyone else is going to do it. Well, guess what? We're still doing the same thing. Even 17 years after that, right? So like a lot of the industry is that while some things are going to change, not everything is going to change. Some things in the building automation industry, you know, like uh, like predictive maintenance, is one thing that people want to use it for, where you don't have to, you don't have to change your belts or filters every 30 days now. Maybe it can predict based upon the data that you're giving it, like, oh, well, you only need to change it here. But, that's one thing, is that you're only good as the data that you actually can even provide it as well. And I think that right now currently isn't a thing that I think that it still needs the human that human touch
It,
to really perform.
yeah, it definitely needs guidance, and I feel like it makes rational sense that it's been built intentionally that way and to have those guardrails. And I think that's a wise choice. So there could be more dangers than we can imagine. But one of the things about, like around you were talking about, Charles, the innovation of the BAS industry in specific is one. I think we're going to accelerate that with AI, and not just in BAS, in marketing, in sales, in every possible facet where you can use AI as a tool. If you learn to engage it properly, like we've been talking about, how the correct prompts, learning how to filter your way through using different prompts and changing out little elements of it. One, it kind of forces our brain to do things differently than we do it on a daily basis. Normally, we have to stop. We have to think. Um, it's We're kind of putting ourselves in a place of intentful um, uh, evolution, and AI is giving us back answers, thinking from different perspectives, like millions of perspectives, literally billions of perspectives, and it can give you insights that you never would have. There's prompts that it comes back and gives me ideas that there's no way I ever would have thought of that idea on the face of the earth, and it's going to start providing answers like that to us for BAS technology, I believe, as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree with you there. And I guess the biggest understanding that really helped me was, especially like large language models. I mean, there's all different types of AI and targeted stuff, but for large language models, it's a great rubber ducking uh, technique. Instead of having to talk to your rubber duck and problem solve an issue that you're running into and stepping through it, you can chit chat back and forth with your AI, and it'll typically give you like it was a great suggestion, Matt, about like it's providing you with all these different pathways that you get to choose, which action to take. Um, and they're not always going to be the best one, but it's something you might have not thought about. And
Right. And if you
yeah,
ask it for more options, it will give you more.
absolutely, yeah. And you can just keep going down that path because in the end, large language models are nothing but a statistical tool. I mean, it's basically generating whatever tokens that it's seeing the most, right? If you think about a bell curve. And some people think, but going back to like iRobot, some people think that it's going to, become sentient and, think on its own. But I can't really see that being the case because what it's doing is it's taking a bell curve of everything that it's seeing text wise, and it's spitting out the best probable thing that comes next in the sentence. And what that leads to is that it's never going to be creative on its own like humans can be creative, right? You can try something different. Like all the best discoveries in the world is somebody saying, "Oh, well, I'm not going to do it the way that it's supposedly always been done. I'm going to try something that I've been told is impossible," and then they make it happen. And that's where AI will always fail because it's always going to go with the most probable thing. So you have to be careful with some of that though, because there's right, like when you have big corporations arguing for regulations, and this happens in the control industry as well. A lot of the times that is to put artificial boundaries on people so that it reduces the amount of competition that they have in the market.
Oh, absolutely.
you
And
know,
I think that's where we've gotten is, OpenAI released GPT, um, and everybody got access, and then all of a sudden you saw all these other competitors come into the market, and they want to stop that. And Facebook did a great thing of really releasing the Olama models as something that you can run locally, and that kind of put a damper in, okay, well, now if I have a GTX 700, which is the oldest graphics card you could run these models on, you can download a model and run it here locally, and you're just using whatever hardware you have and electricity costs. Whereas if that never
Gorilla
happened,
AI.
if that never happened, they basically have a monopoly on the market, and there is no competitiveness. So they could charge whatever price they want, right? At that
yep.
point.
Yeah, it's like I think Nvidia also has one as well. I forget the name of it. But one of the most American things that you can do is do something that that we're told that we can't do, right? So
Yes.
so so like and I tell people that all the time, especially in my Niagara classes, like the most American thing you could do is doing something that we tell you you can't do. And so like with when it comes to regulations or wanting to corner the market on certain things, it's just going to that there is what will lead people to like, oh, okay, we can't do that. Well, watch me do it this way. Um, I think that, I do think there needs to be some kind of, I don't know if there needs to be some kind of limitation, but I guess if you limit what AI can do, then, I think you probably, I think that certain things, I don't know how, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know how we set the boundaries of AI, because I think that, sometimes it's outside of the box thinking to come up with the most logical solution, I think is best. But I think that I think, yeah, you probably have people now that still want to, oh, well, let's try to come up with a way to do hacking here or that and this and that. But it has the full, it has the full power of, of the information that it can see. Like think of like chess engines and whatnot, right? Where you're given, you know, millions upon millions of games, and it can process, data after data after data. Look at what they can do. They destroy, the best chess players in the world. It's like, with the computer age, they've become a lot smarter than what we ever could be. And I think that it's sometimes it's our, I don't know if I would say greed, but maybe more curiosity of what we can actually push things to do. That I think sometimes that stumbles into, I think that can stumble into dangerous territory. But I,
Blind optimism is what I call that.
yeah, I think that's actually a very I think that's a very good, yeah, blind optimism is definitely a, I think I think that's a great way to say it. Like I kind of think of like Thanos from like, the Avengers, where, he just wanted the universe to be less populated. That's all. He was tired of, he saw what, what growing populations did to worlds, and he just wanted to, Thanos did nothing wrong. He was being
Yeah.
pragmatic.
You're just
Um,
simmering the galaxy.
yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Um, so one thing that I don't know if I can, yeah, I guess one thing that I've thought about here with Cameron, fun fact, that Cameron did was he was actually part of Mateo Viva. Um, Cameron, do you want to, or can you talk about that? I don't know if you,
yeah, so Clairvoyance
yeah.
is a company that I started with three other people, and we partnered with a company called Mateo Viva, which is based out of Germany, and they do predictive control analytics to reduce carbon footprint and save the building owner energy on their operating
Right.
costs. So uh, Clairvoyance wrote I wrote a part of the Clairvoyance team. I wrote a API to allow them, Mateo Viva, to directly communicate with a Niagara station so that they can pull their data, the data that they need, and they can submit control schedules back. Pretty simple. And they basically just take a bunch of weather data, uh, run some models on it, and figure out the optimal control set points for your building.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was a pretty fun project. Still going on, still integrating buildings, and I love
You
to
guys talk,
automate my way out of a job. So
brings me back to the mundane in that, I mean, that's the only reason I hate work at all is mundane stuff. So thank God
yeah,
for AI. Keeps me
yeah,
employed.
And that's and that's where I think we'll see the biggest. It'll take forever, obviously, because it's just the controls industry. But Charles has written some scripts, and I've done the same of like looking through a station and adding histories, right? Um, if you know how to use your, some BQL queries and you know a little bit of programming, you can do that pretty easy. But majority of people in the controls industry, and it goes for any computer type of system, don't understand how to do BQL queries or write a little program, no matter how small, and they usually won't look into it. But what AI brings is more of, I know I say AI a lot, but it's more about like large language models because that's the newest, greatest thing. These large language models are more of a great interface to allow somebody, if you just imagine pulling up Niagara and saying, hey, I need numeric interval histories with 15-minute intervals added to all the points that are temperature points in a station. And it can just go through and do that process for you. And that's what we're getting, right? I mean, you could do that before, but now you could just describe what you want. And somebody's programmed that, obviously, to utilize a large language model and some coding in the background to do it. But that's what we're going to have once the controls industry catches up.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
that's where I would envision it going. Sorry, Charles.
well, no, it's quite all right. I think we all have things to say, so it's no big deal whatsoever. The I think that especially with the building automation industry now, you've got obviously Distech, right, with the Eclipse product line and their building intelligence, right? So the Apex controller, has an AI coprocessor in it, and specifically for building intelligence. And people are starting to play with that. Passive logic, Cameron, I don't know if you know anything about passive logic. Um, but they are, they've kind of taken the controls industry by storm. With their ideas of using, I guess what they call is the hive, I think is what they call it. Where they want to use digital twins, which I think is powered by quantum, I think is what they use. And then, the Hive provides like interactive tools for like, interactive tools for like wiring. And I think it uses something called the Swarm Decision Engine, I think is what they call it, for like building optimization as the system ages. So
really going with the insect hierarchy on that, Mark, on that branding.
They are, and I think I think the thing of it is, their mantra is like, as far as building automation goes, they're saying not much has really changed, right? So like so while buildings are are pretty much, containers for the modern economy. They think that largely they're the same using, electric thermostats and proportional control systems and whatnot. And so, they think that it's impossible to tune or it can't be optimized. And so they're trying to come in and change the game, saying that they solve buildings. And as far as like, using like real world physics and stuff like that, I think that there are certain things that it probably is not going to be able to tell you right away. That I still think you need some of the, I think that you still need that human element to do. Like, so for example, I don't know if the real world physics can tell me if my coil is oversized, like my chill water coil is oversized, right? Like, so I think like, certain things like that, especially like, how we tune PID loops, well, we need to know if the coil is oversized so we can change our integral time, right? We don't necessarily need to change the proportional brand, but definitely the integral can change on how it reacts. I don't know if passive logic is going to be able to do something like that. and originally it was supposed to have, a control system underneath, and I know they're coming up with, systems on their own. I know it's done reasonably well in the home automation. I don't know how much in the commercial side. I don't know how much on the commercial side it's done yet so far. But I mean, they raised like I don't know, like $160 million or something like that in like less than 2 years. So they're doing something right. I think that there are. I think you're going to see more of that coming. I think you're going to see more vendors have some kind of co-processor along with their controllers because people want to try their things with AI. Not even including us. We're trying to do it too. We have is it a semi-weekly AI committee?
The AI, yeah, exploratory committee, because we're just figuring out. No one on our staff knows that much about it to really decide what we're going to do with it. Mostly, we've talked about the fear of it and being careful with it. But yes, we do want to go that direction, and we see everyone else going that direction, and the industry. As being a player in the industry, we want to innovate. So
yeah, well, Cameron, where do you see it, for the building automation industry? Where do you see some things where AI can really take advantage of?
So for large language models, it's going to be helping set up the Niagara stations, building that sort of thing. The predictive kind of aspect stuff has really been around a long time, way before large language models, I would say. So yes, you will be able to do more energy savings, kind of run through how the system's operating and pinpoint some, do some tuning of your PIDs if you need to, and say, hey, it could tweak this a little bit to get into an optimal control scenario. But I think the biggest part is the fact that it's just getting the compute power is catching up in a way that it's cheap enough to put these controllers in a building to actually handle that compute. Like you mentioned the Apex controller, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great scenario where you have essentially the thing's the size of a Jace. You could run Niagara on it, and you could also run TensorFlow calculations. So you could then, figure out these, okay, well, I'm going to do a really, we've seen optimal start stop blocks in Niagara, right? But like this is like the next level optimum start stop that you could do for your building. Or I see that this damper is not really controlling and it's bouncing all over the place. Well, maybe I tweak that a little bit. And you'll start to see that on the actual like implementation of the building during its operation. But the downside to those kind of things is you need the data from that building to be able to build that feedback loop. And you had a great point, Charles. Like you kind of have to have somewhere to start, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't have the pre-existing data, it doesn't know what works or doesn't. So
Yep.
you have to give it the starting point. You have to let it run, and then based off of the data feedback, it will be able to learn and kind of optimize from there. But I do think the biggest impact overall in the controls industry with large language models is going to be expediting the programming side of buildings. So, I mean, there's plenty of controls contractors. We worked for one for a while
Mm-hmm.
that they pay somebody to add controllers, add points, add logs to all the different points, do the controller programming part. But in a way, you could speed that up a lot, just having something to say, hey, I need you to write me a BQL query, or you just say, hey, I need history extensions on all these point names, right? And it writes the BQL query for you and the code in the back end and executes it. So that way you don't pay somebody 40 hours a week just to add history extensions to a point. You know, especially on these large buildings where you have 200 to 500 BAV boxes. It's not very efficient.
No, not at all. And I think that there will be, excuse me, I think there will be a misconception that that I think that especially like smaller companies will embrace, is that I think they think that as large language models, and I actually will start calling it large language models instead of just AI, a lot. I think that they will get the idea that they can replace people with the large language models, that if the large language model is performing these tasks here, then we don't need to hire smart people. We just need to hire worker bees. And I don't think and I think that's going to be a bad approach to some people. I've heard some people say that. I'm like,
Absolutely, that's an
yeah,
awful approach.
yeah,
It
I
seems
think.
like a lot of the tech industry has already made that decision and already feeling the wrath of that decision.
Well, you still need people to operate it. I think
Absolutely.
that
You need
I th
creativity.
Yeah, I think in certain situations that that it will, that it will learn and adapt certain ways, but I still think you need the intelligent people to model it. You can't just have someone as I said, and as Cameron's already put out, you're only as good as your data. Well, you're only good as the people that can operate it. So if you don't have a person that can actually direct the large language model where to go, it's going to be directionless.
Absolutely, yeah. You can't replace, like, even with that system I described, that history extensions. If you replace them with somebody that does not know what they're doing, and they don't know to ask to add history extensions and everything, right? Like
Hmm.
and they don't know the reason behind what they're doing. So yeah, you're still going to need the more specialized people, I would say, um, to be able to do that work. And a lot of people are worried about it like replacing their jobs. And that will be the case, obviously, like any new technology in some ways. Um, but you're going to have, instead of there won't be the job anymore of I get to sit at my computer and right click on this and copy and paste anymore. It will be I get a problem and I get to solve it in a creative way. And you know, that's good. So you could tell it you could do more work. It's kind of the idea, right? Like I can tell it to add history extensions, so instead of me doing it for a week, it does it in maybe an hour or two. I still need to verify that everything worked correctly and that there were no errors because it I always iterate this, it is a statistical model.
Hmm.
It 95% it might be accurate and do all of them, but the problem is that 5%. And that's just built into the probability chances of how it's going to spit out those words. And you can see that if you look up accuracies on different models, you can see none of them are 100% accurate. And
Hmm.
that because it's always rolling the dice. And sometimes, you get a bad roll. So,
And even then, large language models can hang up. I wanted to kind of test the limits on actually through IntelliJ. IntelliJ actually has an AI assistant. Now, you cannot feed that AI assistant API like Baja API. It doesn't have that capability. So like, if there is if you have an error in Java, like whether it's lambdas or something like that, you could put in there like, oh, well, this is what it means. But like I've had it where I was like, hey, can you, I'm not sure where you want me to copy and paste that. Can you generate the whole code so I don't have a copy and paste error? And I wanted to see what it could do. And what I found hilarious is that it just kind of stopped after a while. Like it just stopped. I'm like, hey, you didn't give me the whole thing. Oh, sorry, there was a hang up. And then like it started to go through some more and then stopped again. I'm like, you hung up again. Can we like can you give me the whole thing this time, please? So I think like when you have like cloud computing and stuff like that, locally you have the power of the horsepower of what you have in the system, or on your system. But like when you go to like the cloud, and you have servers like that can have petabytes, or I don't even know what's more than a petabyte. I forget what it's called, but like you have that kind of computing in the background. It's kind of hard for it to get hangups, but it's still one of those where you're right, it's not perfect at all. And so you still have to be able to fix that. So, you also hit the nail on the head that the evolution of your job changes. You still have a job, but now you're responsible for more things. And as a whole, I know this is probably a hot take, and people are going to give me a bunch of crap about it, but I think technology, in a lot of ways, has made us dumber.
Absolutely.
In the sense of like, back in my day, I remember when I had a cell phone that was, that was smallish, but like it was black and white. I mean, I only see gray anyway, but it was black and white. It was a Nokia, and all it could do was T9, and it didn't have like the only data it had was sending messages and stuff. Like right, like it wasn't downloading anything, but like where we used to have to memorize numbers and everything like that. Then we could just start putting it in there. And then as like smartphones got smarter, we kind of as a generation, we have kind of the mindset like, oh, well, it can remember for us, so we don't have to anymore, right? Like, how many times do you go on Facebook and you tell someone happy birthday? Not because you've remembered it, because Facebook reminded you it was their birthday, right? Like,
Yep.
and so like how to me that's why I think we're kind of dumber for that. And so I think that with the use of large language models, where it now actually we now have to be smarter to make sure that we keep it in check, to make sure that it's actually doing what it needs to do. So I think this actually gives a little bit of brain power back to us, because now we actually need to understand the process of how this is supposed to go, and then let the large language model execute. And then when we find the holes in which it is not executing, we need to fill in those gaps.
So the speed of communication has definitely affected us for a long time as human beings. And I agree with you. I kind of see this as a boomerang of it coming back. So, I mean, we used to have to wait to get a message from overseas for weeks, months, or years. So the communication between us and the people that we um, were having relationships with at that time forced us to have gaps in time where we stopped and think. So I guarantee we sat and really thought out a letter before it got sent on that ship. So that kind of reflects back to what I was talking about when I have discussions with the large language model, which is weird. Sometimes I do talk to it like a person sometimes. It it's making me stop and more carefully think out the problems and the things I want to ask it, and it makes me stop and think about myself. So I think that is beneficial to us gaining back. I don't Debatable whether we really have any control at all, anyways. But the idea of control, like we have a little bit more, we're stopping and thinking and processing before we make a decision. I'm really curious to see how much AI changes us as time goes on.
Hey Cameron, what do you think are some of the common misconceptions about large language models, and where do you think and it's a two-parter. So first one, common misconceptions, and two, we were just talking about the, kind of like the lack of kind of intuition. What do you think, or how do you think we could go about adding that potential intuition to large language models?
Well, great questions. Um, so the first one, the misconceptions about it, uh, I would say that really, people think it's going to solve their problem and not when they think it really can just read their mind, and, and people do that with other people, right? Uh,
Hmm.
so you really have to, if you want it to get a good response, you have to be very verbose and describe exactly what you want. And on top of that is people expect, and you kind of pointed this out some, Charles, is you can't just paste your entire document in there or like all your code and say, hey, like I need you to do this, because it is a statistics model. So it's going to be way more accurate if you give it small snippets and get a response. And there's a great Stanford online video that came out recently with a professor talking about that, is having the AI do small processes to solve one tiny problem at a time. The accuracy is much, much greater than having it read a bulk document and then do a bunch of work, which it has to take multiple steps to really figure it out. Um, and your second question, what was it again? Sorry.
No, it's okay. What do you think it would take to give large language models some of the human intuition?
Hmm. See, that's the thing, though. I don't think it can. Um, I think that's kind of what I was talking about at the beginning, is I don't ever think it can be creative, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that's because just like any statistics model, it's, if you think of it as a bell curve, because the way these large language models actually operate is it's taking the tokens, and just for simplicity's sake, the words. And our brains think the same way when we're talking. It takes the words that I've said and it tries to predict the next word. So every time it's going to predict, and you can see this when it's printing it out and writing back to you, it's predicting what that next word is based off of the previous words that have been put into it. Now, that how it determines that next word is it is looking at essentially a bell curve of all of the text that it's ever been trained on. So if it's seen a certain sequence of words, the next one, it's looking at what is the closest probability that I've been trained on that the next word is going to be, it or something, right? And since it's trained that way, it's never going to go outside of that bell curve, right? Like it's never going to go to the far left or the far right. It's always going to try to stay right there in the middle. And that's where it can't be creative, because it's like a great analogy is from professor videos and stuff that I've watched, is it is a glorified tape recorder. Um, it has all these recordings that have been out there and that it's been trained on, and it's just piecing different parts of different tapes together. And that's why it's also called like the magical black box, is because like nobody really understands why it gives the responses that it does. And like that just becomes it's rolling the dice and you know predicting the next word. So I don't believe it will be able to be intuitive enough where it can rationalize the problem and solve it in a creative way. It's always going to try to mimic something that it's already seen.
It's very very good points. And actually, I had to mute myself because I wanted to type into Chat GPT. Oddly enough, I just asked it the question: do you think you will ever gain human intuition? Would you like to know its response?
Yes.
Okay. While I can mimic aspects of human intuition by drawing from vast amounts of data and making probabilistic predictions, true human intuition is rooted in lived experience, emotions, and subconscious processing of patterns over time. These are deeply tied to human biology and consciousness, which are fundamentally different from how AI operates. AI, like me, can analyze and generate responses that seem intuitive based on patterns and context, but this has always been based on computational logic rather than nuance, instinctive understanding that comes from being human. That said, as AI continues to evolve, it may become better at simulating intuition in ways that feel increasingly natural and human like, but the essence of human intuition is spontaneity, creativity, and emotional resonance remains uniquely human.
Well, I think that's pretty flattering, which leads me to believe that it's doing that on purpose to manipulate you.
That's the goal, right? Like, yes, it's falling into my trap.
They'll never know.
Yeah.
I'm
How will
just a
they know?
Casio watch.
Ah,
But
oh, go ahead. Yeah, Karen, go
I,
ahead.
it was just like Matt was saying about like nefarious actors were using AI, and we've seen that. Like if somebody wants to use it to send spoofing emails or phishing emails, sorry, phishing emails, it can help you create a very professional looking email. Now, it's just repeating what it saw. Because if you take a company's entire email database and you train a large language model on that, it's only going to give you the results that it's seen. Um, so yeah, that's like any technology. You can use it for nefarious things, right? But it's never going to like decide to create like if without instruction to do it, it's not all of a sudden going to turn on and decide to do great uh, phishing emails and start sending them out, right? Like it's
Right.
yeah, like, it's not going to become sentient and be like, oh well, if I do this, I can just start making a bunch of money, which I don't see it has any use for it in itself, but um, yeah.
Oh, that would be interesting if AI just started to uh, take little incremental amounts and cents from people's bank accounts and offshore it. Uh, how long would we find out? We'd probably have to use an AI investigator to find out to figure
Yeah.
out
Well,
what's going on.
I mean, I do think that there are safeguards, but I believe, we can circumvent those safeguards by asking large language models for things that don't appear to be nefarious. So it still talks
Yeah.
about that human intuition. So like, there are things that like as far as like content moderation, like it can avoid assisting or even like promoting like violence or like illegal activities. But if you say, hey, give me this professional email that states this, this, and this, okay, great, right? Like, yeah, I'll do
Yeah.
that. Like,
Right?
so I think that, while AI can while AI can assist, it's not going to be there to be the mastermind behind the activity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And whether or not that someday that becomes possible, or we use AI to figure out how to make AI sentient, and then we figure out that we just invented ourselves, um, that's a far shot off from the reality of how we would use it in the built environment space. Um, but there's definitely are, I would assume, some ethical concerns just within that space, within the smart environment. Are there any things that you have seen or learned, Cameron, that in regards to people's ethical concerns, or that you've heard from other people?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you ever followed the whole like ChatGPT launch and stuff and been talking about regulations over the last year, if you followed it closely, you know, they originally trained it on or got the data set from online. And one of the concerns well, it decided it wanted to decide its responses were a little racist or something like that, right? Or sexist. And it's like, well, it's just like we talked about it, it's just a glorified tape recorder. So if you train it on data that is racist or sexist, well, it doesn't know any different. It's just spitting out what it's seen before. Um, so
Right?
that's the hard.
It's just accumulating. It's like spiders on the web deciding what's the most relevant content based on how often it's being reproduced, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, I've seen this word more often after these few sentences, so I'm gonna spit that word out. And the Google search is a great example. It's a semantic search, right? So if you search for food, well, it's also going to give you all things it might include restaurant in that search, right? Or as a keyword. And it's basically just doing that over and over again. So whatever it's been trained on and fed into, that's what it's going to spit out. And that's the ethical concern. And going back to this like regulation stuff that a lot of the companies are pushing now, I can't I can't really see like how do you build regulations and are those regulations really even are they impactful at all? Because I mean it's just a tape recorder. Yeah,
Well,
it's how are you supposed to regulate something of that sense? I mean, you could say, okay, well, you have to make sure that, it doesn't say any racist or, or sexist things this often or something on its outputs. So that way you really just don't offend people, I guess, but it doesn't know. It's just spitting out what it's seeing.
yeah, I think that's a great point. Like where eh, by attempting to quote unquote regulate in the sense of things like that, right? Like you'd have to train it to be using pretty much anything that's gender neutral, right? Or or without trying to regardless, you're going to offend someone. Someone will be offended by something that is said by someone or
Right.
something. It's just
Will there be
at,
anything left once you regulate it? Are you
yeah,
Yeah.
you
just
might as well.
silencing it?
Yeah, you might as well just not. Well, like, look, I'm not going to say anything because I'm going to get in trouble. So, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Um, I think I think if you do limit it, uh, you know, or what they will try to do. Um, I think outside of the safeguards that we have or that are already built into large language models, I don't know if we can really do anything else, right? Like because again, we've kind of beaten this as a dead horse, that human intuition. Um,
Yeah.
the like AI, I mean, large language models can give us things that on the surface seem very very mundane, like, oh, there's no harm in that, but someone is using it for harm. So how can we be responsible, or how can large language models be responsible for ensuring that what someone is asking for it is a legitimate thing, right? Like
Hmm.
it's not like, to me, you just can't do that. So I think it's all about being a good person and not wanting to do that. So I don't think I don't think that's ever going to happen that way. um it's just a matter of what humans want to do. Like there's
Right.
always going to be
Leave the
someone out there.
accountability.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and there's
leave
always
the
going to be that.
accountability at the human level.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And programming languages are the same way, right? Like you could argue, well, if I write a program that, you know, that tries to hack into, or brute force passwords on a VPN or something. Well, obviously, like, the program or the programming language is not nefarious. It was me being
Yep.
nefarious, right?
Right.
So, and large language
Um,
models are the same deal.
One thing we can be absolutely sure will happen is it it will be a lawmaker that creates the regulations, and they will make no sense.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
And a
uh,
great example of that is, I think, is it Gavin Newsom, the governor of
yes.
California?
Yep.
So I think they were trying to pass a bill in California recently, this year, about trying to regulate large language models. And it was something along the lines of, like, if it was a large language model over 70 billion parameter size, it would have to pass some sort of regulation ban on it. But that doesn't really do anything, because it turns out that small small parameter language models are actually more effective than some of these, like, very, very large parameter sized models. And that goes back to it's losing context, because there's more probabilities in the whole output for all of the tokens or words. And yeah, so that sort of regulation, and you got people that don't understand. Luckily, that bill was vetoed because it made no sense. But how do you regulate something like that in a meaningful way without it just being these big corporations wanting them not to have competitiveness? Because I bet you Sam Altman 4 years ago would have been preaching not to have regulation on it. But now that they've become one of the top large language AI like companies, now they're preaching regulation.
He wants to
So
Yep.
stifle. He wants to stifle competition.
exactly, he just wants
Yeah.
you to make jump. Anybody else have to jump through hoops that he didn't have to jump through.
Yep. And I mean that comes along with, being at the top, regardless of what product it is, right? Um,
Yeah,
like, people are afraid of having their technology taken. Well, news fact, some of theirs probably was taken from something else. Um,
absolutely.
so, like, everything is, while some of it is innovation because they had the forethought to turn it into something that no one thought about before, but the fundamentals have been there for quite some time. It's just that someone else was able to add it, and now they don't want people to piggyback off their hard work. But guess what? They already did the same thing. So, like,
Right. We've
for
been
Absolutely.
doing it since someone figured out you could chip a stone into another tool. That's all.
Yeah,
All of this has come to where we're talking about today, right now. All
yeah,
borrowing
absolutely.
from the last person.
yep.
Looking at BAS, and we're looking at automation for efficiency and applying AI there. What are some of the dangers that might be possible there, like around the idea that, you know, if we put something into a controller that has um, too much access to things and can make too many decisions on its own, like, can we potentially mess things up? Can we destroy equipment? Can we um, wreak a lot of havoc without carefully putting guardrails around that?
Yeah, that's a great point. And that is probably exactly what might happen. If you're gonna have, even like with the Matea Viva control, there needs to be some guardrails on its outputs or set points, um, for controlling that equipment. Because if a reading goes bad somewhere else, and that model is based off of that reading, that temperature sensor or something, and there's no guardrails in place to say, hey, like, that's probably not a good reading, and we don't need to base our output off of that reading, and it does it anyways. I would imagine, that could destroy some equipment, or at least set the set points way too high or low, and cause comfort in the building to be suboptimal. It would be the best way to say it.
Right, and
Uh,
if we're looking at like high priority scenarios like hospitals or um, it's a facility that has to pump out certain amounts of toxins every moment of the day, or else people it can actually have negative impact on people. Um, there's some potential dangers right there.
Yep. And that goes back to, Charles's comment on you're not going to be able to have little worker bees utilize these large language models or predictive, you know, control models and whatnot. You're going to have people that understand how they operate and understand that, like, hey, this, I probably should put a limit on this set point or whatnot, so that it can never go way out of bounds, and will be able to at least, not fail in a drastic way. And that's always been the fun side of controls programming, and in my mind is, figuring out when the pump fails, what do I do that I can keep the chiller plant running or something, if at all possible. And if that fails, how do I properly shut down without, destroying equipment? Um, it's all about the what ifs.
What do you think is going to be the biggest downfall of large language models?
Oh, well, we just kind of pointed it out, I think, is not to be a smartass, but yeah, it's gonna, it gives somebody so much power that if they don't understand what they're doing, they can break things in a drastic way, right? So, I mean, if I ask ChatGPT to write me an SQL query and it somehow puts in, delete table in there, and I just copy and paste it and run it in there, well, now I just deleted my whole database. Uh, yeah, that's why they always say, hey, you need to read what it outputs, make sure it's right, and verify that this is what you want. Um, so, and that'll happen in controls as it gets there as well. It's going to be, hey, I need to make sure that it tags all these history extensions on these points. Well, what if it writes something that deletes all the points, and or adds the history extensions in the wrong place, or it gives the individual more power that they usually wouldn't have. So that means they can break more things. And I think the people in the controls industry that have seen how BQL queries can work, and robots, like writing little robot scripts and whatnot, it's that same mentality, right? Instead of you breaking that one thing, you're going to break the whole station. And it's just one click of a button.
What about, all right, so here's a scenario. How do we, so for example, we know in colleges, right? One of the things that colleges try to look for is the ability to suss out whether or not someone has used AI. But as you and I both know, we can create a large language model to mimic our own, our own language model that we may have, and uh, the generators that they have, or the calculators that they have to determine whether or not a large language model was used, could be way off. Do we think that potentially it's just there comes to a point where we consider that large language models are the way to help us move forward in even the progression of technology and learning, and allow it to continue to happen, like especially like at the university level?
Yeah, I mean, and I have I don't really like universities that much.
Sure.
And go on a rant about that. But as somebody that's dropped out of university before, I found that the community college experience was much better doing a technical trade. But yeah, I think so. Learning with large language models is amazing. I wish I could go back to 12 to 13-year-old me wanting to learn how to program, and instead of having to read a book, I could still read the book. But if I had any questions, since things like ChatGPT have been trained on vast amounts of code, it has, and all of Stack Overflow basically, it is there to answer any of my questions. Whereas before, right, you might have to Google something, and read through a bunch of forums, like obscure online forums, people talking about
Yeah,
computers or
sift through
programming.
the garbage of the internet.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really a Google search on steroids. So, it's read all of that. Now, you can't take everything for granted, right? That it spits out, but most of the time it's pretty darn accurate. So as something like if I was 13 and I read a programming book and I was like, oh, I want to write a program to do this. Well, if I get stuck, I can ask it and use it as a rubber ducking technique, or almost like a professor, and I can learn anything that I want to do about computers and technology and programming through that. And I think it'll get better as well. The Bing AI is pretty good at this, where it would provide references for where it found something, right? So, I hope that gets better over time, because if it spits something out, I might want to go read that documentation and dig into it. And if I search in Google, I might never see that documentation. But if I can get a summary response from ChatGPT or something like that, and then it gives me reference to the documentation, and I could go and read deeper on it if I want to. Uh, that is, I mean, that's amazing. I mean,
It
what
is.
could you ask for, right? So,
Yeah, I do actually. I actually take advantage of that whenever it is provided. Gemini seems to be making strives towards providing that as much as it possibly can, and
mhm.
I'm following that link half the time. Go and dig a little bit deeper, reading the actual report, or um, whatever it is I am asking the question about. So I guess it's kind of a conundrum that it needs our hand to hold, and then we're holding its hand to the next
Mhm.
stage,
Yeah,
which is kind of wild, and why I in my imagination I can speculate it going going other places. But um, one of the things I was thinking about around where it's going in the future and stuff is um, how AI might start influencing us to design better buildings, not just better buildings, but design um, better air handlers, design better machinery and operating technology, um, and where you could envision some of those changes happening. Um, like we talked about where it's kind of being applied right now in and how we can use it in coding and how we can use it to make N4 easier to use and stuff like that. But in the future, um, the sky's the limit, really. Is there anything you envision unfolding for that future?
yeah. The creator of Wolfram Alpha, if you've ever used that math website,
I
I think he
have
did a
not.
TED. I think he did a TED talk on it.
It is super sweet.
Yeah, awesome. The guy is a genius, in the truest sense. But he pointed out that with large language models in this, we talked about it's rolling the dice. So imagine if you could take an air handler design or whatever and give it the base parameters, but then run like models on it that it tweaks one little thing at a time. And so that as it tweaks that one little thing at a time, you get an output, and it's doing a calculation. on that model. So you could run through all the different fan configurations, all the different cooling or heating cool configurations and whatnot. And yeah, you're going to have some things that you're going to have like boundaries on. But at the end of the day, you can generate 1,000 different air handling configurations and come to the conclusion that this is the most optimal one. And we started to see that some in CAD as well, with this like generative design stuff where, hey, I have this part, here's my loads between these 2 points, generate essentially a geometry that will maximize the torsion forces that it can withstand in a certain direction. And it can run through, millions of those iterations. And Charles hinted on this about like the ones that compete in chess. We've seen this before with, was it called Deep Blue? I think it was. It was the Microsoft AI that did the Go, like won all the championships in Go. And then they moved on to more complex games such as like StarCraft 2 and whatnot.
Yep.
And really what it's doing is and circling back to the Wolfram Alpha guy, he had a TED talk and he was saying, basically you can give it a starting point and it can generate all the probabilities around that. And then you can kind of direct it in a direction that you need that will be more optimal. But what it's doing is instead of you doing all those calculations and all those different trial and errors, well, it can do all the trial and errors for you, and then you can decide on which one you want to pick. And I think that's going to have a huge impact really in just about every industry, right?
Well, that's it for this episode. And remember, stay curious and prepared for Judgment Day. Until next time, I'm Charles.
And I'm Matthew.
And this has been It's a Controls Problem.
Thank God for AI.